Hello, friends. This is Hank, your pajama scholar, with an AGR at 6:07. I wanted to talk about the past. I want to talk about the future when it comes to, or with regard to, racism and what my experiences were, the experiences I've had throughout my life, my cultural understanding or lack thereof, to give it some sort of historical context, where it is today, where I believe it's going in the future. So I'm not going to just speak specifically on black and white issues. Some of the issues are a little bit more are beyond black and white. They have a tendency to be more along the lines of affiliation, but I'll get into that a little bit more. Once I've covered that, I'll talk about the future. Now, what inspired me to go on this tack this morning? Well, I'll show you. I'll pull a quick clip for you, and I'll show you.
Look at this mess. Tatum store, get the merch link in the description section. Don't worry about what Adam 2024 mean. Look at this mess.
Hey, y'all, come look at this.
I'm going to show you the video where they break in and mob into the store and just steal everything. Now, I want something to be very, very clear. Look at the people who are in this video. Look at the ethnicity and the demographic that's doing stuff like this in the community that they're doing it in. Because the reason why I say this,
Okay, we may continue on with that piece in a moment. Or maybe not at all. Because I think his point is clear. Although, I'm going to let you draw your own conclusions. And I'm going to talk first a little bit about the history, at least on the East Coast and South, Deep South. As I understand it, and how it affected me in my youth. So if you'd like kind of a good book to read, that'll kind of outline this. It's not about racism at all. It's about history. It's called Chesapeake by James A. Michner. Fantastic artist. He also, writer. He also wrote Space. But Chesapeake really gives you a good historical perspective from the earliest settlers around the Chesapeake Bay area to modern day. Or at that time, modern day, which would have been like 90s, I guess. So it takes you all throughout the evolution of the way people lived in the Chesapeake Bay region, which is where I'm from. Grew up just a little bit north of Richmond, and I spent a lot of time in the Tidewater, I've been all over Virginia back in the days when I was doing inspections and things of that nature. But it's pretty much generally well understood. Back in the days of slavery, the slaves that were a little bit, let's just say, better behaved or more desirable had a tendency to be in the more northern regions. And what would happen if a slave was disobedient, or, well, generally speaking, it was disobedient, what they would do is they would take the slave and send him to basically sell him at a discount to a more harsh slave master, so to speak. And then if he continued to be disobedient, then they would send him further and further south. So it was like the further north you got, the slave masters were generally not as severe, and the work was not quite as laborious or intensive. Like in Virginia, slaves would be fairly well integrated within the manor house or whatever, or the plantation. I mean, they would have their separate quarters, but it wasn't uncommon, for the wet nurse to actually live inside of the main house. It's pretty well known that Thomas Jefferson had relationships, physical, sexual relationships with his slaves, and it's quite possible that many of the white slave owners had mixed black children. In many instances, slaves were kind of integrated into the family to a certain extent, because you all lived and worked and ate, well, not necessarily ate together, but you were all essentially mutually dependent, even though that the there was a big distinction, of course, because one was property and the other was free. But if a slave was disobedient, he would be sent, or she would be sent. I mean, they did everything they could to break the cultures, break the family units. It's the same thing that you would do if you got a lot of times, sometimes pairs of birds. Like, I got a pair of birds, I lost both of them. Reason being is because I got them as a pair. And one flew out, and the other looked for the day that they would fly out too. I guess because of that past history they had, they wanted to be together. So the next time I buy a bird, I hate to use this analogy, but the next time I buy a bird, I'm not going to buy the pair. Like, I'm going to buy one and then get one from a different set. I don't intend to break their wing, but I don't want to encourage that type of cooperation between the two where I lose them. And I think this was very much the same line of thinking that people who owned slaves had. So they would, I'm sure there was probably multi-generational slaves on the plantations and such. But I haven't studied slavery to any great extent. I'm no scholar. So if I'm wrong, correct me. So the the more disobedient the slave was, the further south that they'd be moved. So you'd go from Virginia to, say, North Carolina, where it would be more agriculture, more tobacco, more cotton, more physical labor, more severe punishments. And you go to South Carolina, and the punishments become even more severe. You quite make it down to the line of Georgia, and a lot of times slaves were held in so low regard that they would be basically expendable. You would have the meanest and the harshest of the slave masters. Now, at that point, Florida wasn't very agricultural because most of it was the Everglades. About 100 years ago, they drained off the Everglades, and the migrant workers that came into Florida to work the farmlands that were previously the Everglades, a lot of times they were Hispanic, sometimes black, Haitian. If a slave was to get so far south as to, say, Georgia, it's possible that they would have been sold again to a place like Haiti, where you had sugar plantations and things of that nature. Well, one particularly disobedient slave, man that desired freedom, his name was Napoleon, black man named Napoleon, rose up in Haiti and drove the French out, because it was the colonial French who were running the sugar plantations in Haiti. So Haitians to this very day have a very, let's just say, a certain kind of strength, I guess, that comes with the culture of being Haitian, knowing that they had overthrown the French colonialists and developed their own nation. But again, this is all just, I can't say this is purely academic. This is just from what little spattering of studying that I've done, what I believe the truth probably is, or at least close to it. Okay. So, kind of want the purpose that I point this out. It wasn't until the Industrial Revolution, and then after the Civil War, when the South was basically continued to be decimated, because they did fight the war over economics. Slavery was part of it, because slavery is an economic function. By that time in the world, pretty much every other, I wouldn't call them first world nations, but every other civilized nation had pretty much banned slavery by that time, whereas America had not. We were one of the last ones to give up slavery. So the Civil War was partially about slavery because it was about economics. As the Industrial Revolution took off, the factories and things in the North were able to produce more than the agricultural goods in the South, and the people in the North wanted to control the, I guess, the outflows of good. It had a lot to do with money. Of course, it always has to do with money. The people in the South felt like they were getting ripped off. So, freeing the slaves might have been a point of propaganda, and I think, as we've seen recently with the whole COVID thing, how willing people are, how willing people that lack conscience are to degrade, suppress, act tyrannical when they get in a hive mind or a group think. Just like in Germany, when the Nazis came around, and the Jews started disappearing. You keep thinking to yourself, no, this would never happen. This was not going to happen. But you saw how people would rat their own countrymen out, and how close that we got in certain areas of the world, and how they're doing it in China, where if you disagreed with the policy, they're going to throw you into a quarantine camp, essentially a concentration camp, because these people were so brainwashed, so rabid about their perception of what this thing was because of what they had been told, which was a blatant lie. Like, now we know, like, if you read, the Diary of Anne Frank, now we know, like, you would think that it would be impossible for someone to rat that girl out hiding in the attic. But of course they did. And now we know, because of human nature, that there's only that fine line that would take us right back to that same place. So we know, because we've just recently lived through it, how rotten, how awful people are when they want to suppress or ostracize or degrade or dehumanize another human being for not sharing their particular groupthink. So, the Industrial Revolution, like, Ford needed workers for his plant after the Civil War. A lot of the poor black folk in the South went to areas where they could get manufacturing jobs, which were very good jobs. And you found, areas like Detroit were very, very beautiful. When a black man was making way, way, way more, enough to support his family, enough to have a little something for himself, working for himself, without economic freedom, there can be no freedom. Then when a man was able to get a paycheck, it gave him a great sense of worth, of community. And while people, I think, were still segregated, they did work together. And black communities had a strong sense of community because they had a place to base it around. They were free. They had economic freedom like they had never experienced before. Of course, the white people didn't want, the black neighbor to move right in. Why? Because they're different. But black communities flourished in this time. It brought us all kinds of new art. Motown, for example. Great music. And I think a lot of times, politicians from the civil rights era that are still active kind of look back to those days of Motown. They haven't seen the realities that come with economic hardship that is spreading throughout not only the world, not only America, but throughout the world. Now that those economic opportunities in Detroit are gone and have been gone for quite some time, what have we seen? We've seen a degradation. What did we see in California as people became more homeless? Saw a degradation. Now, why is it a systemically racial issue? Or is it that once you start to take economic liberty away from people, you're going to have rebellion. And this is a way that a culture rebels. They go in and do things like this. So, white people by and large seem to be getting by, but they're really not. We're all being put under a lot of economic hardship. So that's just one part of rebellion against suppression. You say, why do they do that? They do it because they're black or they're Hispanic, because they're heathens. No. But because it is perceived that way, and because when your leadership suppresses you, so your leadership suppresses the white class or the middle class or whatever a white perceives himself to be. He can wake up in the morning and he can think to himself, well, I'm white. This is my society. It's tribalism. You end up starting to enter tribalistic sort of activity, just like if you were put in prison and you don't have any economic freedom in prison. You don't really have any freedom at all in prison. So what has a tendency to happen in prisons or in public schools? A lot of times, blacks will have their clique, and whites will have their clique, and Hispanics will have their clique, and the others will be the others. It's just a tribalistic mentality that people do. People operate on what they can see, because what they can see is their reality. You can't trust anybody in this world. So you always look for this tribalistic mentality in order to build relationships. And what's one of the first things that you can see? Well, you see the color of another person's skin, and you're able to say, that person is different from me. Now, I've experienced this, but not in a racial sense. But I've purposely done it to see what would happen. And it works. I know it's true. Being different, acting different, looking different, you'll be treated differently. Like, for example, that neighbor and I that didn't get along very well. So I went outside to contemplate things as I do. And he, quote unquote, did not like the way that I looked. Because, I was wearing this sash or shawl with this ribbon. And, he just gave me, some lip or something. And occasionally it's in my spirit to, flash that evil eye. Like, I'm seriously gonna fuck you up. And it just came out of my soul. I didn't mean to do it. And I've worked really hard to be at peace. Love thy neighbor. Continually. But yeah, he's like, you're 40-something years old. Like, you look, why you dressed like that? You're weird. You're different. I got long hair. I do act differently. Or I'll look like a total homeless person. Dirty shorts, wearing the same shirt for 2 weeks, not shower for 2 weeks. Have stuff spilled all up and down my shirt. Like, yeah, people will treat you differently. Now, that's not as extreme as being of a different race, but I had far more problems with that guy than I did my black neighbor at the time. I really liked the company of my black neighbor, although he was only here for a very short amount of time. And my neighbors now are mostly white, but a fairly good mix of South Americans. So from Venezuela, Ecuador, pretty much Venezuela, Ecuador. I don't know any Colombians today, but I'll get into that in a little bit. A Mexican, Puerto Ricans, but I don't, these are all Spanish-speaking people, even though technically Puerto Ricans are Americans. So, a Puerto Rican is just as much as an American as I am. So anytime we get a hurricane or whatever that's going to hit Puerto Rico, that's why we're always delighted to see Puerto Ricans. We have a lot of Cubans, especially the further south you go, the more Cuban it's going to become, although we have a few Cubans here. And by and large, I really have always enjoyed the company of the South Americans and Caribbean peoples. It's very different than the hostile nature that you would find between some of the black and white issues that you get in, say, like certain parts of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina being Charlotte, Virginia, Richmond. Now, when I was a kid, I'm going to skip over a few things to go back in time to when I was a kid. And I was very well integrated. And so I was in high school in 2001. I was a senior in high school on 9/11. So I was a senior in high school in 2001. I graduated in 2001. Class of 2001, 2002, something like that. And I grew up in basically, when you get to high school, where the district was cut in half. You had the people that were far out to the west, which was like a little bit more sparsely populated. And then you had people out to the east, and I was out to the east, and it was all, I wouldn't say like super sparsely populated, but you could walk to your neighbor's house, but it was still a pretty good distance. You had to go, up a highway or whatever. I'm not talking about like suburbs or anything. Just houses along highway. And I grew up riding the bus with black people, and it was just black and white. And we were always kind of self-segregating, but that really had nothing to do with racism. It's just like the black kids like to sit in the back of the bus, and the white kids kind of pretty much like to sit in the front of the bus. I guess the black people didn't really like the bus driver being all up on them, and we white kids wanted to get the hell off the bus first, or we did want, like like in the back they'd be playing music and doing all kinds of crazy stuff, and just having a good time. And in the front, like, generally speaking, I'd read a book or something in the morning, or we'd play Dungeons and Dragons on the bus, or just played Magic the Gathering on the bus, in the front. These are things that the black kids just weren't into. And so it wasn't really a racial issue. It was just an issue of, I guess, preference in what you liked to do. And But see, since you see the same people every day, you grow up with them, you know them. There's no racism that's going on there. Like, hey, that's September. Hey, that's Walter. Hey, that's Sherrod. Like, you don't really think about the whole, like, that they're black, or that's Tutti Frutti Rudy. Like, Tutti Frutti Rudy was one of the first people that reached out to me when I'd gone through some trouble and I got moved around a little bit. Anyway, I had to go to a different school where I didn't know anybody. This was, when I was young, probably like between 4th and 5th grade. So I left everything that I knew and went to a place where I didn't know anybody right before we were all going into middle school. Well, of course, by that time, kids had all grown up together. You're not going to make any friends. It's just not going to happen. You might have somebody that might, but no, not really. Well, there was just one kid, light-skinned, black boy that I thought was a girl. And, his name was Rudy. Genuinely tried to be my friend. And we were friends because sometimes that's the only friend that you can have. And as I got to know my neighbors and get to know more people and things like that, and once got people, told me, and they were making fun of him and stuff. I felt like it would be something that would kind of get other people off my back if I showed them, how much more like them I was. So I turned, treated him poorly. I became a bully. I guess it was because maybe I was hurting. I wanted to be accepted. I didn't have the fucking balls when I was at that age to stand up. And I sincerely regret that those acts of moral cowardice. Because instead of me being picked on, to be damn certain that I wouldn't be the one to be picked on, I would figure out exactly what was wrong with you, or wherever your soft spot was, and I'd attack you mercilessly. Anybody who was a little different, like there was this guy, Elvis, we called him Elvis because he had this longer hair. He smelled kind of funny. He was a poor guy. There was a PR boy. Called him PR boy for Power Ranger boy. I basically had befriended some bullies. And PR boy would say some stupid things from time to time. You know, even as a kid, I wasn't lacking for intellect. He'd say something stupid like, snakes have legs, microscopic legs, or I built a computer out of my couch. And we would tease him unmercifully. There was one particular day, this kid was sitting in the front of the bus because the bus driver put him up there because he couldn't get along with any other kids because we would tease him and ostracize him so unmercifully that it would cause trouble. So she tried to isolate him. And everybody on the entire bus, everybody, started shooting spitballs at him, throwing paper. Everybody. When the poor boy stood up to get off the bus, literally the trash rolled off of him. And the seat was filled full of trash and garbage where people had just thrown trash and garbage and spitballs at him. He wasn't black, he was white. Elvis was white. We always said that Elvis had head lice. You know, why did I do these things? One day I said something stupid when I was first getting adjusted, to going into middle school. I had like an ace of spades with a fish on the back. And it stands out to me today for an entirely different esoteric reason, which is why I may have done. It was not why I did what I did. I didn't understand what I was doing when I did it. But I was like, I'll steal your soul with this ace. And then the bullies thought that I was the PR boy. That I would be the one that they could tease unmercifully. I quickly realized my mistake. And I set out to become more vicious than anybody else. I didn't want to be that guy. Now today, I look at the ace differently. And I look at fish. I didn't know very much about the Bible back then. The fisher of men, where Jesus goes and tells them to cast their nets from the right side of the boat. So maybe that's why that incident, may have in the past demonstrated something to me, at least that sticks out in my memory. The Lord works in mysterious ways. I made fun of Rudy, but not because he was black, but because he was effeminate. And he was the only person to offer me any kind of friendship at all. But I couldn't associate with him because of how I felt that I might be perceived. Moral cowardice. There's nothing worse than a bully and a coward. And I was both. I despise that. So even to this day, all these years later, I still... I mean, it's not like I killed a man or anything, but... I betrayed the good in me. But there wasn't that much in me at that point in time. I was only a survivor trying to survive. Which is, I'm afraid, the way that most people that don't change, that don't look at who they are or what they've done and reflect. I mean, I don't think that ever in my life I have felt the shame of what I did more than today. Like, I knew I was ashamed, but I'm feeling it today. And I can't make any apologies. I can't go back. I can't change it. And I'll get over it. I'll dismiss it. I just feel it. I hadn't revisited exactly how I felt about that sort of treachery. But, I mean, there's all sorts of different classism and exclusionary things. Like, if I were to, say, have taken my old Jetta across into Longboat Key, unshaven, long hair, the police would follow me. They'd probably pull me over. They'd ask me what I was doing there and where I was going. Just like if I was going from West Palm into Palm Beach. Like, if you don't belong there, they're going to figure out what you're doing there. Why? Because you don't live there and you're different. And the more different you are, the harder look they're going to take at you. So this can come in all sorts of different ways. A car, the dress code, the haircut, your past laurels, your education, your business, how much money that you have, the way that you speak. When I was working in the insurance industry, when it was all coming to a close, I'd gone up to Tampa, to New York Life, to see. I was pretty much done with it anyway, but I figured I'd take one last crack at it, working with another guy, because I had been recommended to work with him by somebody that I respected a great deal. Let's see if I can find something to wipe my nose. Here I am bawling like a fucking baby. Some fucking post. What do they call it? Not fucking post-menstrual. What do they call it? When women go through those hot flashes and shit. Get all emotional and crap for no fucking reason. We're going menopause. Yeah, I feel like some fucking broad going through menopause. Anyway. I laugh at the absurd. I'd gone up to New York Life, because I had been recommended to work with this guy, and I had to get retrained in a different product. And I befriended a black lady up there at the time, but I can't remember her name exactly. But I really liked her a whole lot. And she was like in her 50s. And for all intents and purposes, she was absolutely no different than me. She was female, she was a little bit older, and she was black. But for all intents and purposes, our education was the same. Our profession was the same. Our business dress code was the same. Our ability to communicate and speak was the same. Everything was the same. So I said, hey, come on down and have lunch with me, and I'll introduce you to some of my colleagues. And she said, sure, I'll come down. Well, the old-timers from a different generation took me seriously only insofar as I pointed out that they needed fresh blood, or by attrition, they would all die off, basically, and have nothing to show for it in the end, if they didn't admit more people, even though I wasn't as wealthy as they were, or are, or old, or with any particular great laurels or anything. I did have a profession, but I wasn't making a very good living at it. For all intents and purposes, I considered myself to be poor. I was barely scraping by. Again, just like this woman, no different. But, buddy, when I brought a black woman, they looked at me. They didn't say anything. They wouldn't say anything. But they can give you a look where they're like, the fuck is wrong with you? Like, that's simply not acceptable. They're old timers. They're from the old school, and they're serious as a fucking heart attack about maintaining this, I guess it's homogenous culture that's very rigid. It's a very rigid. I mean, they had a woman that was actually adopted into the program that was Chinese, and she had been in there for years upon years upon years. But to my mind, to my memory, that was the only person of another ethnicity. I mean, there were multiple types of religions. That was no issue, because it was a secular organization. It was a global secular organization. I was passing a very, very dark-skinned black guy and his girlfriend, casually dressed, just as casually dressed as I was at the time. And I was, like, not looking like my normal homeless self, but more like, I was going out, because I was going out to eat with some veterinarians and such for a celebration, because one person was leaving the company, a doctor was leaving the company and moving to another one that was still, within the area. But, we were both heading, like, right at each other. Now, like, usually it's the custom, you walk on one side of the street or the other, just because like normal traffic, like that's the way you go, that's the way I go. It's just kind of generally understood. Well, he happened to be coming straight at me. And I was just continuing straight on. And he stepped around me. He walked around me. And he said something to me, or I said something to him, or he said something to me, and I turned to speak to him, because what it was he apologized, I guess, for like walking directly at me or walking on my side of the street or whatever. And it didn't occur to me or anything. I wasn't thinking anything specific or not. I wasn't trying to present a particular challenge or anything. I was just observing the cultural norm. And I was a little bit shocked, I guess, or confused, where an apology would be necessary. So I turned on my heels to try and figure out what he was saying. Like, what did he mean? What was he saying? And I don't think we talked about that. And I might not be able to describe exactly, or might be able to repeat verbatim exactly what was said, but my impression was, at least, that it was kind of like this is the observance and the cultural norms in this area, but for me to be careful or something of that nature, if I was to do that somewhere else or something like that. Now, he wasn't being threatening at all. I think we were all out to have a good evening. I think the truth of the matter was he was out of his element by far. He was probably, visiting or something, and probably just wasn't accustomed to the way that people can act, especially in that area that we were going to do regarding people of color, black people. Like, the old timers in that area, they just, I don't know what to say. And we gave each other a fist bump. He was an incredibly strong guy, handsome guy. His girlfriend was beautiful. They were both in great shape. And my girlfriend said something to me. I said, so I just wasn't thinking. I get a little aerial. I get lost in my own thoughts. I'm not really paying attention all the time when I'm kind of just considering something else or looking around for like a doddering professor or something, a pajama scholar. And we just walked off to the trail and went on to have our dinner or something, but it was odd. Weird. Now, we do have an area in the confines of the city that's all black. I went not like court-ordered community service, but I went to serve the community. And I went down to the to this area where they have like an after-school building or whatever, because this black woman had come up to speak to us about some of the programs and things at this community center and how important it was for the youth to be able to have some place to go after school, to get juice or food or hang out or whatever until their parents got home, because a lot of times their parents had to work late and there just would be no parent in the home. And it was a lot better for him to be down at the community center, and the community center didn't have very many resources. Well, the community center had been founded years earlier by another member of the club, her father. And so it went way back. So she had a very special place in her heart for this place. And I think the woman that was running it knew that, remembered that, and came for help. So I had been, when I first got to Florida, I was doing house painting, because you can bear, it's a great living. If you can do it right and get the right clients and stuff, you can make some pretty good money real quick, which is what I needed. And so even though my painting days were over, I still was, I'm still skilled. So I said, I'll go down there and I'll paint I had a couple of meetings with her on the STEM programs on science, technology, engineering, and math. But I went down there to paint. I wanted to paint the whole building, but I brought enough primer and some rollers and things, and ladder and brushes. I expected to have some help. Any help would have been fine, but it was just me and her. Even though I had let everybody know that this is what I was going to do, I needed help. The club president, thankfully, I had been there all morning working my ass off, because I only had one day to do it. I was already working my ass off anyway, just fighting to survive. I thought with just a handful of people, I could get the whole thing done in one day, easily, no problem. Because they had moved the furniture and everything away from the walls and all that stuff. But just me, and I was working as fast and as hard as I possibly could. Well, I knew I wouldn't be able to get back to it, so I had to go until I could finish. I had to keep working until I finished. Now, a black man that was older than me, probably in his early 50s, I would say, came up and sat in a chair in the middle of the room and watched me work. And I thought to myself, this is the oddest thing. I don't understand. Like, why is he not helping me? This is his place. This is his community. Like, any help would have been welcome. I wouldn't have needed anybody particularly, like a good painter or anything to get some things done. Anybody can roll a wall. And that way I could climb a ladder and get everything, cut in real quick. I can do nearly 12 feet to a side, cutting in, since I'm tall. On an A-frame, I can get almost 12 feet done. So, I'll have to go up on the ladder a couple of times while somebody else would roll the wall. But he just sat there and watched. He didn't say anything. He may have even been watching a TV or something, but more specifically, he was just watching me. This was unusual. I didn't ask anything. I didn't ask him any questions. He didn't ask me any questions. He simply observed. Now, thankfully, the president of the club came down. And I guess in a semi-token-esque gesture, he, picked up a roller and did something. And so when he got there, instead of doing the absolute very best professional job I could possibly have done, like I would have done for a paying client, we just threw it up as quick as we could, at least to the point where I was satisfied that there was a coat on it. At least if it was just primer, at least it had been done. And we went and had a hamburger. He went and bought me a hamburger. He basically relieved me. He remembered that I was there. He relieved me. He saw the effort that I put forth, but it was still an expensive investment on my part, of the time, of the materials. I was out all of that. You know, not something that I could claim on my taxes either. And I didn't. I didn't get reimbursed for it or anything. So, and I was dead broke at the time. Fortunately, the president of the club bought me a hamburger, and it's one of the best tasting hamburgers I ever had in my entire life. Altruism, like charity, is something I have a hard time wrapping my head around. Like, who appreciates and who doesn't? And why do they appreciate and why do they not? Anyway. Just another curious example. Now, back in the day, and this is getting a little long, I know, probably about an hour. So I could go on, and I suppose if you're interested, I'm not going to go over an hour. I suppose if you're interested, and maybe because I'm interested, I'll revisit this because there's a lot that's been unsaid about, my days in Bradenton, inside of kind of a drug culture, the motorcycle gangs, the Colombians, I believe they were Dominican counterfeiters, the black muscle that worked for the drug dealer, being totally different, like from another planet, different. That was some crazy times. Back then I was suicidal. I didn't really give a damn. So I'll talk a little bit about my own criminal incompetence, like why nobody ever asked me to be a criminal. I mean, some people had asked me to be a criminal, like, hey, do you want to sell heroin? I'm like, no, I don't want to sell heroin. Like, go in and return this fishing reel, and I'm just so criminally incompetent because I'm not a criminal. I couldn't even get that right. So people just never asked me to try to do anything fucking criminal because they just knew that I would fuck it up. Like, I took a guy to get drugs one evening or something because they wanted to party. We all wanted to party, I guess. But it was like, you drive me over here, and it was like to a really, really bad part of town. And I had to cut the muffler off my Jeep. Let's see, man, it's probably because I wasn't here at the beginning, but what is the point you were trying to work towards? Well, that's one of the things about AGR. The point that I'm going to work towards, if you want me to quickly get to the point, Florida eventually will be more racist than you ever have known in your entire life. They will probably pull you over if you're jaywalking black, or they're even got this silly law in Tampa where if you're biking across an intersection while black, they're gonna write you a ticket or put you in jail. Definitely gonna put you in jail for being doing any serious offenses or serious crimes. They have for-profit prisons. So what that basically means is there will be certain areas that if you are if you're black, you probably shouldn't go because they're going to be looking for a reason of why you were there because you don't belong there. And then they're going to throw the freaking book at you and put you in prison. And you're going to work there, probably, cutting easements and doing other things for the state, because you will be at that point a ward of the state. It's not to say that justice won't be equal. They'll definitely come after those white people that, you know, do criminal shit and kill people and all kinds of things. Those punishments will be equally as severe, if not more severe. But for the lighter infractions, I'm more than certain that that, you know, if you don't belong there, then they're going to be looking for you specifically. Like, it's going to go in reverse like it used to be. Like I said, they used to, as the South was coming and getting a little bit more, you know, so they would send the more disobedient blacks or slaves further south in the future. Apparently my OBS cut out. Reconnection successful. I don't know how much of that you guys lost, so if it's necessary, I'll just upload it. My point is that white people will be looking for, especially as they're oppressed by the leadership, then they will be looking for other people to oppress, and they will be absolutely unapologetic about it, and they'll feel better. And they're not going to understand. And I don't know. But that's my point. Draw your conclusions wherever you want to. I'm just saying that's what's going to fucking happen. That's the way of the future. So, it's been Hank, your pajama scholar. Catch you on the flip side.